are used forced because they didn't want to. Now, remember that every time ASUU had gone on strike, everyone has said, do not call it off until your demands are met, which was one thing that led to the length of this 2022 strike, because we are going to stay through this one until our demands are met. Guess what? Even that did not make the government meet ASUU's demand. My question now is, how long a strike do we need to have before the demands of ASUU will be met? Because if you can afford to have people stay at home for almost a year, and that did not make the government bulge and say, let us swiftly implement this, or have a renegotiation and implement what we can as quickly as possible, how much time should a strike then last before we think government will look at it and do what is needful? Remember, there have been calls for renegotiation, which is where we are going to go to. The demands that ASUU have been making, I can't go to all of them. So in preparing for this conversation this morning, I only highlighted a few that I would like us to just touch before we get onto your response, because I think many of us have really the timeline. So we understand that this problem is not today, and almost every year, I've given you a timeline from 2009, ASUU had to go on strike. To think that ASUU had to go on strike almost every year, and yet government didn't honor the agreement, don't bat an eyelid. Most of the time, the strategy was, at the end, then they come, set up a committee, we are calling them for meetings, we are discussing, that meeting will last for a while, ASUU will then be forced to suspend it. You can't be on strike while you're negotiating with government, and that's how the trick has always played. At this point, I think any Nigerian will call it a trick of government, because that's the routine, that's how it works. Anyways, some of the few demands of ASUU. The first one was the university revitalization and funding. This is a problem, because I remember here we had a conversation about, in fact, for the past weeks, we've been talking a lot around education. We had a conversation around the decay in infrastructure, where I had a former ASUU president as a guest in the studio. We're looking at the decay in infrastructure. I was asking them, most of the fundings that we get for the classrooms you have are all TED funds. So where's the monies what are the schools doing? It was a big problem. I think there's now an embargo the government has placed on new institutions. We can't set up new universities, no more new tertiary institutions, which I think is a great idea until I think 2030. That's what they said. So what's going to happen between now and then? How are we going to improve the ones on ground? One of ASUU's demands was university revitalization and funding. It is arguably the most crucial demand that was on ASUU's list. In that 2009 agreement, it stipulated that government would inject significant fund. In fact, the funds was pegged at about 1.3 trillion naira into public universities over a period of 6 years. What's the education budget now? And calculate that and look at how much is even going really into the universities. This was something that was negotiated in 2009, and the money then was 1.3 trillion. If you look at the economic realities now, 1.3 trillion might not really cut it. But it was supposed to be the case in the past 6 years. So in the past 6 years, we look at the education budget. Has it been able to solve this problem? If we are going to count from 2009, is what I'm saying. So that was a very key figure. They needed infrastructures that were decaying to be looked at. Laboratories needed to be upgraded. Today, if you go to the laboratories in our institutions, can you look at it? Can you put your hand on your chest and say, oh, we have a stand? Let one person send me a message or call me and tell me, in my government school, I'm talking maybe the University of Port Harcourt or any of tertiary institutions run by government, and tell me that the laboratory in your school is top-notch, up to standard. It's as simple as a laboratory. I'm not talking too fancy now. A laboratory. We're in a country where many people are in universities and then they are studying computer engineering, and many have not seen a computer. In fact, when you're teaching these classes, you have just like 2 computers. In fact, and those 2, one might be the lecturer's laptop. I went through it in school. We had a borrowed course that we did at the time. It was something with computer. We're doing binary and whatever it was, can't remember. And it was 1 laptop, and we were like hundreds of us in the classroom. I remember the classroom was in somewhere in the Ofrema building. Somewhere in the Ofrema building downstairs. I can't remember exactly, but it was in the Ofrema building. That's what we had. It was a this thing caused. So we had everybody there. One laptop far in front, and you had everybody in front crowding the laptop, the rest of us behind. That was it. We didn't know what they were doing. So has there been any improvement in our laboratories now, which was one of the demands that ASUU had there, and it was the number one. Funding of institutions and revitalization. We have to revamp the infrastructure. We have to upgrade laboratories and improve the overall learning environment. The government failed to release funds as agreed, and that has been a constant reason for the conflicts that we have between ASUU and government. That's not all, though. Payment of earned allowances is another problem. I remember ASUU had a protest, I think 3 days ago, where they were talking of welfare of lecturers. Money's been owed. And don't forget that they were not even paid backlog of salaries because of the protest, which government has said, no, nobody will be witch-hunted. There was going to be nothing, suspend it, everybody. People were not paid salaries for some months. They say because there's no work, no pay. You remember that drama? And as we speak to date, I don't know, I might be wrong, I'm not a lecturer. And I would also like to encourage, it's really difficult to get some of the ASUU chairpersons for some of the institutions. It's really difficult. I don't know. We speak with some of them on the news, but to have them on the show, even members of ASUU, at some point, I think they just got tired of talking. I wouldn't blame them that much. I think they just got tired of talking. Because for them, I think it's a broken record. We're repeating the same thing. We're shouting the same thing. So you really wouldn't blame them. But there's that was a problem. There was the renegotiation of the 2009 agreement, which was also fundamental because, like I said earlier, the realities of 2009 is no longer the reality of now. And ASUU had called for a renegotiation of that agreement because of the economic realities. They argued that the salaries and conditions of service for academics have remained stagnant since 2009. And this is what is leading to the brain drain. All right. There's a lot of other things. Adoption of preferred payment system, the UTAS and IPs, wahala. I can't go into all those details. But because I mentioned renegotiation of the agreement, I would like to give us an idea of the structure of the salaries of lecturers. Don't forget that already a professor is said to earn at highest or a little over 500,000 monthly. That's what a professor is earning for all the years of everything he's done. That's what he gets in a month. But government gave its reasons why it was difficult to honor the agreement it entered into with ASUU. And I remember ASUU saying at the time, government is continuum. It's not because the APC government then was saying, oh, the agreement that was entered, the economic realities now are different. And one of the major excuses that government gave at the time under the Buhari administration was lack of fund. And then we were in this country, snakes swallowed money, reports of looting there were monies the loot that were recovered. And people were asking questions about all the Abacha loot, all the funds, Paris fund, or what was government doing with it? Where was it going to? People just did not understand what was happening, and the government kept saying no funds. Financial reasons was one of their major arguments on the part of government. And don't forget, some people even labeled ASUU as greedy and saying they were asking for so much. If you remember the Minister of Labor and Employment at the time, I think it was Chris Ngige. A lot of things were said. Now, let me tell you this. The salary structure for lecturers. As a graduate assistant, now I might be not 100% accurate, but according to the reports and documents here that I got, it says at entry level, academic position, usually master's degree, for those who have master's degree, they are on what they call CONWAS 1. And the annual salary is about 1.2 to 1.4, a little over 1.2 to 1.4. So monthly, we're talking 105,000 or 100 to 120,000. That's the range. Assistant lecturer, this is the next step, CONWAS 2. It's annually is between a little over 1.4 to a little over 1.7, which means salary is within the range to 140,000, a little over 140,000. Lecturer 2, this is CONWAS 3. The annual salary is around 1.6 to 1.9. Monthly is 137 to around 160 plus here and there. If you go to lecturer 1, annually they are making about a little over 2 million annually. So annually means a accumulation of what you earn every month. So, but monthly is around 170 to about 200,000, a little over 200,000. Senior lecturer is within 250, a little to around 370. That's the range. So you can be anywhere between those in between, but that's the range. Then reader, that's associate professor, is also within around 314 to 400 and 15, 17. That's a range there. Why for a professor, it's between 380 to about 525. That's the range. So there are some professors that might be earning lower than 525,000. That's what I'm trying to make us understand, because it's a range. So there might be some professors earning 400 and something thousand, earning 500,000, earning 480. You can never tell, but that's the range. And so, as you said, this is something we have to look at. This is something we have to look at. Now, when you look at the details that I've given you and then the timeline of the strike actions, you can't even count how many times ASUU have gone on strike anymore. It's a lot. But from 2009 at least, which is where I started to research from, it's almost every year. Almost every year. If there's anything out of it, I'm thinking like maybe just 3 years in between that, they never went on any strike. But they had issues, they had threats of embarking on strikes. But maybe government negotiations and the rest, they didn't. And then don't forget, parents and Nigerians who will also plead and say, oh, think about the children. ASUU should think about the children. And for a long time, ASUU had also been made to look like the villain in all of this. The people have always looked at ASUU as being the ones that are the problem. They are the ones taking the money, and then the people turn on ASUU. And we've seen this happen many a times. But now it's becoming clearer, I think, because we have a lot more people now understanding that, okay, this is what's happening. The big question now, if you go on Facebook, we need you to respond. What is the next move now for ASUU? Because if you could have a strike that lasted for almost a year, and in that period, this problem still was not sorted, it simply means that a strike might not be what the government cares. It doesn't move the government. It doesn't make it tick. Strike used to be that's what it should be. But if a strike lasts for a year and still did not get a result tangible out of it, what's next now? What's next now for ASUU? How do we solve this problem and make sure that we do not have our institutions shut down because the federal government has failed to honor certain demands or do what it needs to do? We'll take a short commercial. When we come back, we'll open the phone lines and get your thoughts.
The show continues after this break on Nigeria Info.